Hello friends, in this video I am going to discuss the Factoring Regulation Act 2011 enacted on January 22nd, 2012 by the Parliament. The Factoring Regulation Act made certain provisions related to assignment of debt to factor, registration requirements for factoring and exemplifies in relation to debtor protection. However, before discussing the provisions of this Act, let's understand first what is the Factoring Regulation Act 2011 all about. As defined in this Act, it is an act to provide for and regulate assignment of receivables by making provision for registration therefore and rights and obligations of parties to contract for assignment of receivables and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Now the question is, what is meaning of assignment? As defined in section 2A of this Act, assignment means transfer by agreement of undivided interest of any assigner in any receivable due from any debtor in favor of a factor and includes an assignment where either the assigner or the debtor are situated or established outside India. So, for the purposes of this clause, undivided interest of any assigner in any receivable shall not include creation of rights in receivables as security for loans and advances or other obligations by a bank or a financial institution. Now, to understand this definition, let's check out the meaning of certain terms used in this definition. Let's start with the first, that is, what is meaning of assignee? As defined in section 2B of this Act, assignee means a factor in whose favor the receivable is transferred. Now the next question is, what is meaning of assigner? As defined in section 2C of this Act, assigner means any person who is the owner of any receivable. Now the next question is, what is meaning of debtor? As defined in section 2H of this Act, debtor means any person liable to the assigner, whether under a contract or otherwise, to pay any receivable or discharge any obligation in respect of the receivable, whether existing, accruing, future, conditional or contingent. Now the question is, what is meaning of factor? As defined in section 2I of this Act, factor means a non-banking financial company as defined in clause F of section 45I of the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934, which has been granted a certificate of registration under subsection 1 of section 3, or any body corporate established under an act of parliament or any state legislature or any bank or any company registered under the Companies Act 1956 engaged in the factoring business. Now the question is, what is meaning of factoring business? As defined in section 2J of this Act, factoring business means the business of acquisition of receivables of assigner by accepting assignment of such receivables or financing, whether by way of making loans or advances or otherwise against the security interest over any receivables. Now the question is, what is meaning of financial contract? As defined in Section 2K of this Act, financial contract means any spot, forward, future, option or swap transaction involving interest rates, commodities, currencies, shares, bonds, debentures, or any other financial instrument. Any repurchase of securities and lending transaction or any other similar transaction or combination of such transactions entered into the financial markets. Now, the next question is, what is meaning of netting agreement? As defined in Section 2L of this Act, netting agreement means any agreement among the system participants for the purpose of determination by the system provider of the amount of money or securities due or payable or deliverable as a result of setting off or adjusting the payment obligations or delivery obligations among the system participants, including the claims and obligations arising out of the termination by the system provider on the insolvency or dissolution or winding up of any system participant or such circumstances as the system provider may specify in its rules or regulations or bylaws by whatever name called of the transactions admitted for settlement at a future date so that only a net claim be demanded or a net obligation be owned. Now, the next question is, what is meaning of receivable? As defined in Section 2P of this Act, receivable means all or part of undivided interest in any right of any person under a contract, including an international contract, where either the assigner or the debtor or the assignee is situated or established in a state outside India, to payment of a monetary sum, whether such right is existing, future, accruing, conditional, or contingent, arising from and includes any arrangement requiring payment of toll or any other sum by whatever name called for the use of any infrastructure, facility, or services. Now, the next question is, what is significance of registration of factors? As defined in Section 3 of this Act, no factor shall commence or carry on the factoring business unless it obtains a certificate of registration from the Reserve Bank to commence or carry on the factoring business under this Act. Now, the question is, what are the rights and obligations of parties to contract for assignment of receivables? As defined in Section 11 of this Act, without prejudice to the provisions contained in any other law for the time being in force, the debtor shall have the right to notice of assignment under Section 8 before any demand is made on it by the assignee and until notice is served on the debtor. The debtor shall be entitled to make payments to the assigner in respect of assigned receivables in accordance with the original contract, and such payment shall fully discharge the debtor from corresponding liability under the original contract. Now, the next question is, what is meaning of principle of debtor protection? As defined in Section 15 of this Act, save as otherwise provided in this Act, any assignment of the receivable shall not without the express consent of the debtor in writing affect the rights and obligations of the debtor, including the terms and conditions of the contract. Now, the next question is, what is meaning of breach of contract in reference of this Act? As defined in Section 18 of this Act, if the assigner commits any breach of the original contract with the debtor, such breach shall not entitle the debtor to recover from the assignee any sum paid by the debtor to the assigner or the assignee pursuant to the factoring transactions, provided that nothing contained in this section shall affect the rights of the debtor to claim from the assigner any loss or damages caused to him by reason of breach of the original contract. Last but not the least, that is, what is meaning of offense in reference to this Act? As defined in Section 23 of this Act, if any person contravenes or attempts to contravene or abets the contravention of the provisions of this Act or of any rules made thereunder, for which no specific penalty has been provided for, he shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year or with fine or with both. So this is all about the Factoring Regulation Act 2011.